Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for our spring 2019 virtual tasting. I guess good afternoon to our friends on the East Coast. My name is David Amadia. I'm the president of Ridge, and it'll be my duty and honor to host today's tasting. We're coming to you live this morning from our Monte Bello estate in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Because our wet winter has extended into a wet spring, we're indoors today. It's raining outside. So we're coming to you live inside the Old Tory Winery here at what is today our hospitality center. This is where the first 7 vintages of Monte Bello were made, starting in 1962 up until the point where the Monte Bello Winery was purchased in 1968 and refurbished for the 69 vintage. We'll be tasting 6 wines with you today. Our spring releases including the 3 valleys, so I'll just go through the wines in order quickly with you. The 6 wines are the 17 Estate Chardonnay, the 17 Three Valleys, the 17 Paso Zinfandel, 17 East Bench Zin, 17 Geyserville, and the 6th wine will be the 2016 Estate Cabernet. These are all young wines. They need a little air to show at their best. We double decanted these wines about 1 hour ago. Hopefully you were able to do the same. And as always, we encourage you to double decant the wines before you take them out and share them with your customers. They're certainly going to show a lot better if you do that. Also, hopefully you've been able to print out the tasting mat and have all 6 wines out in front of you and you're ready to go. On a side note, about every 4 years at Ridge, we host an advisory council meeting to help guide the winery's strategic future, looking out 5 to 10 years. We had our most recent council meeting in February, and we had some really nice, significant outcomes, and we thank our council for that input. One of the topics was, during the council meetings, the virtual tasting. Generally, the virtual tasting is loved and remains one of the few live and interactive tastings geared to an audience of wholesalers and retailers. The feedback we got was that there's more competition in this space and that we need to continue to evolve and improve the tasting, and we promise to do that. And specifically, we were talking about improving reliability and interactivity. So we do apologize for the technical difficulties we had last fall, but I think, and I pray we're beyond that. And in terms of interactivity, we really want to, and I want to emphasize this, encourage everyone to participate utilizing that chat function on live stream. I know we ran a video loop before the start of the live tasting this morning, showing, giving some instructions on how to use the chat function. For those who missed that, just a quick tutorial. I know that a lot of you like to watch the tasting on a full screen, but before we go into the full screen mode, please go ahead and click on the 3 dots that say chat. And then once you click on those 3 dots, you then click on pop out chat. At that point, you can drag and drop the chat anywhere on your screen and then go to the live screen mode. So that'll allow you to watch in full screen and watch the chat simultaneously. So that's it. So please chat away. Your interactivity really adds to the flavor and the energy of the tasting. I know the winemakers really enjoy it. So we look forward to fielding all your questions via chat today. If you're old school and you still want to send us an email, we'll still field those, so send your emails to wholesale@ridgewine.com, and those will all get fed through to me as well, and those will get presented to our panel. We're also encouraging you to share your experiences today with social media. Through social media, the hashtag for the event is Ridge Virtual. It's hashtag Ridge Virtual. So please post your photos, videos, comments, thoughts, utilizing that hashtag on Instagram, Facebook, or whatever your favorite platform is. So I'd like to introduce our 2 key members, leaders from our production team that are joining us today. Directly to my left is Eric Barr. Eric is our COO and head Monte Bello winemaker. Eric joined Ridge in 1994, and he's in his 24th year here at Ridge. And we're really lucky to have Eric with us this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And on my far left is David Gates. David is our Senior VP of Vineyard Operations. David joined Ridge in 1989. He just completed his 30th harvest in 2018, and hopefully he'll survive one more, the 31st, for 2019. So thanks to David and Eric for joining us. And since it's raining out today, and the rainy season hopefully will be coming to a close shortly, but it seems to be moving into spring, wanted to ask David about rainfall totals for this past winter, where we stand here at Monte Bello and up north in Sonoma, and just generally what the start of the 19 harvest season looks like.
Sure, thanks, David.
Thank you.
Eric. Yeah, so we are at about 46, a little over 46 inches here at Monte Bello and counting. It is raining a bit, and it looks like next week is we might have a little bit more weather too. Spring has definitely sprung. The Chardonnay's trying to grow. There are leaves on it. The Cabernet and everything is still thinking about it up here. Lytton Springs is a little bit more there, over 55 inches, so that's a big year for them. And Geyserville just behind that at 52. So we've had, I would say, several northern storms, which is typical. We always get more rain at Lytton Springs and Geyserville in northern Sonoma County than we do here at Monte Bello. But this year in particular has had some central and southern California storms sweep through. So the desert's blooming right now. It's supposed to be just beautiful. And also Benito Ducey down in Paso Robles has gotten over 24 inches of rain, which is huge for him. Really, really good. The downside to all that rain, especially in the spring, is that it's delayed our bud break. We're about a month behind. And I'd say that's pretty much across the state, at least the North State, and which is, depends on, of course, what happens in the summer. That's going to push harvest back a little bit. So we'll see.
So we'll see. Yeah. Maybe later harvest this year.
I love farmers. I mean, it's either wet or it's too dry. Or
Yeah,
but I love your attitude. You smile all the way through it, David, no matter what.
Definitely California, once the rain's in, then, we're going to have a nice dry summer. Whether it's warm or cold is really still up to the weather patterns. And we'll be able to get to ripeness.
Definitely. It's just knock on wood, we haven't had a November harvest at Monte Bello for a while.
It's been a while, yeah.
But I'm confident if we have to, we can do it.
Yeah.
So we'll
just
see what happens.
Gonna roll with the punches.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, David. So I think it's time to start tasting. So Eric, I'll ask you to kick it off.
17 Chardonnay.
Yeah. So this wine, we saw a slight increase in production over 16, but still limited in supply.
Yeah.
We have only 20 acres or so planted
Or
here.
even less now. It's
Leaving-
about 17 acres.
It's gone
We've
down, I
lost
know.
some acreage, and bloom, of course, was affected that year. And I didn't pull as much out of the Monte Bello. So there was really more of the blocks brought together to make this wine, even though we were working with less fruit.
Okay.
But there is a Monte Bello Chardonnay. It's still in the
It's just very small.
barrels in the cellar, 8 barrels worth of that wine.
Okay.
So it's tiny. So I brought most of the parcels together in 17, and they all showed really great elegance and balance and perfume and really beautiful fruit of classic Santa Cruz Mountain Monte Bello vineyard. 17 was kind of of course, a very wet year. We had those late spring rains sweep through and affect bloom. And then summer was a roller coaster of intense heat and at times some real cooling off and fog, and that kind of helped slow the ripening down. And our interest is making Chardonnay in a lower alcohol range. So we stepped in really early that year and was picking off large parts of the vineyard as each area hit flavor ripeness. And of course, that Labor Day weekend of September, temperatures here shot up over 100 degrees. So luckily for us, we had already harvested most of the Chardonnay to really keep it, from over ripening. But it all fermented well in barrel, all natural yeast. Malolactics went through on schedule. We actually were able to begin tasting and make the assemblage earlier just because everything had gone so smooth in the cellar.
Sure.
And then we were able to put together an assemblage, rack it off, put it back to barrel, let it continue aging as a lot, and then racked it off in December to prepare for bottling, which then had to kind of coincide with steady barometric pressure, the moon, all that, because we don't filter the Chardonnay. So for it to be as clean as we can get it out of barrel, we had to use the moon as our friend to help with gravitational pull. But it really brought it together so well. I mean, it's a really elegant Chardonnay.
Yeah, it was showing beautifully. So I know David and Eric, you both have spent some time out in the market over the last month or two, which we appreciate. And I know our wholesalers and accounts appreciate seeing you face to face. So I'm going to ask you some sort of sales oriented questions now that you've got that in your blood. So if you were a sales rep, and I mean, literally there's thousands of Chardonnays for sale in California, made in California. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would want to tell a potential account, a potential buyer about this wine that really differentiate it from other Chardonnays produced in California?
That it doesn't really taste like any other California Chardonnay, for one.
That's a great start. So it's unique.
And it's more moderate, unique. It's a cool climate site here with the limestone. You've got the ocean proximity, the fog. I mean, it's a really complex Chardonnay that really, I have not encountered another one that is even close to this.
Yeah.
You know,
So
it tastes like white Burgundy.
Yeah, so the minerality, the cool climate nature,
and
really
also
set it aside.
Yeah, the aging potential of this wine also is so amazing that it just gets better with time. I mean, it's not at all like the rest of the California Chardonnays that you have to drink young or drink within like the first 5 years. This, I mean, I've had great bottles of our Chardonnays that are over 15, 20 years old that still drink well.
So and I would add that you know, the Santa Cruz Mountains is a great place to grow Chardonnay.
It is.
You can get it as ripe as you want, so you get that kind of California sunshine in the glass. But it always finishes with beautiful acidity, and that helps keep it fresh and clean and lively.
Just because of the bigger change in temperature between night and day, and because of the proximity to the ocean, it's giving that freshness.
So we face we face the bay. We get, you know, all of our weather is influenced by the ocean, but what the Bay Area and the San Francisco Bay brings to us. I hate to say that word though, San Francisco Bay, but that's there's an appellation.
It's right there below the vineyard.
But what that does is brings in a marine layer, and that the inversion layer sits just about where the majority of our Chardonnay lays. So it does get warm in the day, warmer in the day down at our lower elevation than it does at our upper elevation, but it gets much cooler at night. Exactly. It's that inversion layer really helps that.
Keeps it really, the grapes holding their acid, so it's really fresh, vibrant, lively. You know, the acidity in the grapes when we're picking is pretty extreme.
So given the different nature of the wine, how does it differ in terms of food pairings versus maybe a more classic California Chardonnay?
I think it goes better with food. Being out in the market and having many different dinners with different cuisines, I mean, it just, you know, the acidity there is such a wonderful element to have for food pairing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
great.
And also we're careful about the oak that we're using. It's all barrel fermented, but we've been really moving into older cooperage for it, so really keep the oak integrated.
No, we've really seen that evolution.
Being, you know, a heavier, you know, more oak influenced Chardonnay style.
It's more fruit driven.
More to the balanced style.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you both. So why don't we move to the second wine, which is our 17 Three Valleys. Now we're seeing a good supply on this wine this year, which has been a change from the past couple of years where we're seeing increased availability. And we know moving into next year as well, we're going to have a fairly large 18 vintage, even bigger. So we can say with a lot of confidence from a selling perspective for the next 24 months, we are solid on Three Valleys, and you can go ahead and sell this wine with a lot of confidence that we're not going to run out of this wine. So from a pure selling and supply perspective, we're in good shape with Three Valleys today.
We really are.
Yeah. So maybe the question for me about this wine is, how, as a winemaker, how is it different for you to make Three Valleys versus Lytton Springs or Geyserville?
There's no difference. I mean, it requires the same care of handling the fruit in the winery, receiving, fermenting in small batches. And, you know, we'll begin the assemblage process with all our single vineyard wines, and we're not using 100% of the fruit from those vineyards. So there's always going to be anywhere between 20 and 30% left over that we'll then carefully taste and assemble. And we always have some leftover Grenache, Petit Syrah, Carignan, Mataro, all the typical blending grapes that we can bring to this assemblage to really put it together and create a style of wine that we really want to express as a Three Valleys, which is all about early drinkability, accessibility, nice round balanced tannins and also complex as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to show a single terroir because it's made up of 8 different vineyards between Dry Creek, Alexander, and Russian River valleys.
Right. So this is our entry-level wine. It's not a single vineyard wine. It is a blend of 8 different vineyards from 3 different appellations. But do you still feel like it represents, when a consumer has a glass of this, does this represent Ridge in our style?
Oh, it does. I mean, because it's a wine that is going to evoke some great, enthusiasm when you have it in your mouth. The flavors, the spice, the exotic fruit, the complexity that's there. I mean, it's not going to be one of those intellectual wines like Geyserville or Lytton where you're going to be able to study and taste those terroir, the terroir and uniqueness. But this is still really an amazing wine, thought-provoking because there's all that great complexity coming from, the blend of the vineyards and the varieties.
It's a double complexity in that way, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different challenge for the winemaker in terms of, rather than trying to translate a personality of a particular vineyard into glass, here you're taking all these disparate lots and trying to put them together into something that's harmonious.
To declassify out, I mean, we're still going to select only the very best of the lots that are left over. And many of those are wonderful wines on their own. It's just that they were missing some of that vineyard personality that would not allow us to include it in their single vineyard.
Yeah.
But still be really wonderful wine. And then you have this synergy effect of working with those lots from those different appellations and putting it together, adding Carignan, Petit Syrah, and the other grapes to then build in the complexity.
Yeah.
And then barreling it down, aging it just like all the rest of the wine, racking it the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of the handling through is the same as Geyserville and Lytton Springs.
Sure. I mean, Paul isn't here with us physically, but he's always here with us spiritually. And Paul's always said, right, that if you want to have a great first wine, you have to have a great second wine.
Really have to.
So this allows us to have a great Lytton, a great Geyserville, a great Ponzo. It allows us to have these great wines because we have this second wine that's also a great wine.
Yeah. And very expressive of Sonoma County. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, when you look at our focus with Zinfandel, we've put most of our energy and efforts working in Sonoma County between those 3 appellations because we just feel that's got the most optimal weather and microclimates to produce top quality Zinfandel.
Ground zero for great Zinfandel, absolutely. And that's why we have Lytton Springs there as well, because we are committed to that region.
Yeah.
I mean,
and so how many acres are we working with up there? I mean, it's a
lot.
It's a lot.
A little over 300, 320 of our own estate vineyards. Whether we own them or lease them, they're still under our control. And we've recently stepped up the amount of growers that we're working with. So we have a few. Some of those are, well, all of those are chosen for what we hope to be some single vineyard wines made from them. But then if there's excess, and we always try to make sure there's a little bit of excess so we can choose only the best for those single vineyard wines, and then the rest goes into this very important wine for us.
And it is important, David, because most likely the first wine a consumer will try from Ridge is this, right? It's our largest production, it's our entry-level point, so odds are the first time somebody has Ridge, it's going to be Three Valleys. So that means this has got to be a really good wine if we want them to move on and try our other wines.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you've tried a lot of wines, I know. I mean, where does Three Valleys, given its price point and other wines in that price point and styles, I mean, where do you think that sits in the pantheon of all those wines being made today, David?
Well, for me, it's not a cheap wine, right?
No, not anymore.
Or I should say it's not an inexpensive wine, but it does, I feel, really represent value. As one of our core values, that's really something that we need to make sure that every wine that we make, even regardless of the price, gives a really good dividend to whoever's going to buy it. And you know, Sonoma County is a great place to grow red grapes, especially Zinfandel and the other varieties that blend into it. And I feel like we've been very fortunate over the years, especially with Paul being in the market so long and finding some jewels of vineyards that that as long as we still look for those really good vineyards, that we can keep making a really nice version of this wine.
I mean, it's a nice advantage of being at this for 60 years that we've been able to go out and make wine from lots of vineyards and choose what we think are the best, right?
Study
Yeah.
those areas and
Yeah.
try it, and and where we've liked, the quality the best, and where you get the best consistent quality is
Yes.
Sonoma County.
Yeah, vintage after vintage.
Yeah.
Well, let's get out of Sonoma County for a second, and
Go
we're
south,
gonna go to Paso in the 17, and we'll see this with pretty much with all three of the Zins we're gonna try today. The volumes were down in 17, David. Why were the volumes down? The weather was good.
Well, we got the rainfall.
We got the
days,
rainfall, but it didn't bounce back the way we expected in 17.
Well,
what happened there?
The blessing of a decent amount of rain was that it continued to rain into the spring and during bloom across the board. And I've been in the wine game for a while, and it's very rare that you see across the state crop levels down 20-30%. 17 was that rare year where everything was down. I think it's also a residual from the drought. The vines recovered somewhat in 16, but there weren't a lot of clustered primordia on the shoots in the spring of 17, and then we had bad rain during bloom, and so that affected the sets. So we started out with less clusters and ended up with clusters that were smaller than normal.
which was actually nice, smaller size clusters.
Absolutely,
Berries, yeah.
yes. It helped.
Like
It helped with
concentration.
yes. It helped a lot with complexity and concentration, but it did not help with yields. And I think it's really great if you still have some 16 Zins to do the comparison, because 16 for me was a very fruit-forward, very expressive vintage. 17 is equally expressive, but it's got this grip on the finish, and it's a more intense wine. It's a little bit more like 15.
And definitely
So
because of that yield hit.
Absolutely,
I mean, you just feel the
yes.
wines have so much more intensity.
yeah.
But sadly, we produce less.
Yeah.
And we didn't pull out a separate doozy this year, so this really
This is the whole ranch.
Yeah,
Okay.
almost all of it. There's a little piece that actually we kept out, a little essence.
Oh, for a late harvest
Tiny
wine.
little late harvest, yeah.
And for me, it's just singing in the glass. It's just,
Oh, it
it's
is.
a
I mean,
beautiful wine.
it's just, over the years, this wine has just gotten richer and richer. We've been able to, because it's the first grapes that come into the winery, we can put it into the submerged cap tanks, lower those grids, get really good color and tannin extraction.
Right.
And it's just also really acidic. I mean, it's unusual for such a warm region Zin to have that acid, but I think it's also probably because of the location and
Yes.
the Templeton Gap gets the fog, and there is some diurnal temperature
Right.
variation there.
Yeah, and it's sitting all on alluvium, so it's just outwash.
yeah.
But that alluvium is full of limestone, and that helps too.
Yeah.
so
It's
that-
nice. It's
yeah.
a nice site.
Very similar to Geyserville then.
A little,
Yeah,
a little
in
less
that-
gravel, but there's more gravel in the north. But
Okay.
it's nice.
I mean,
It's,
in the glass, I'm tasting that grip of the 17 vintage, but I'm tasting also the freshness of the acidity too. It's got, it's a little more complex than some of the Pasos in the past. It's not quite as simple. There's a lot of complexity to this wine.
It's robust.
Exactly.
I mean, we got in as fast as we could and picked, and
Yeah,
even
after-
with that, I mean, it still fit just over 15%.
And that sort of leads
Yeah.
to a question that we've got through chat regarding our our labeling on the back, ingredient labeling, that we note that there's a 3% water addition to this wine. So maybe Eric, you want to talk about what
So
that?
maybe I should have made it 4% and take it down just under 15.
What is that, and why do we do it?
Well, just assessing the fruit when it's coming in. As we do our first pump overs, we'll do all the primary chemistry and check, how ripe, what's the sugar content, the flavors, the intensity.
Right.
And, where it was starting to, soak out, also because, Zin is notorious for having a certain amount of shrivel and raisin. You just have to anticipate, if it's at a certain level of initial bricks, that it's going to soak even higher. So to kind of keep it from becoming 16% alcohol, we made our water additions fairly early on in the fermentation step to just kind of rehydrate back the fruit a bit where there was some shrivel and raisining.
I think it's interesting because we probably more than anyone else get questions about water additions because we are honest
Because we put it out
on the
there,
label.
yeah.
But I mean, how common a
Transparent.
practice is it in California,
Oh,
particularly with Zinfandel?
Very, very common.
Yeah. So
I mean,
like
it had always been
Okay.
done. I mean, the government did finally open up and allow wineries to legitimately start doing it around 2004. They changed the rules. And
Interestingly, it's
Yeah.
still we can't do it in Canada.
oh yeah,
if,
yeah.
if there's a water addition, their rules don't permit it, which is obviously crazy. So they don't
Yeah.
get to see some of our wines as a result of that. But that's okay. That's more for everybody else, right?
Yeah.
It's
I
okay.
mean, but probably the vast majority of the wines that they're bringing in from California, it's being done. It's
sure.
just it's not being listed
not
on
on
their
their
label.
No,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true as well.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean, our intent is to not have to do it. It's just a matter of rounding up enough labor to get in, pick it before the grapes get to that point where, this was all picked in the end of August.
And
But
it's still
they were
tipped over.
having some good heat at that point, and it was just a matter. We couldn't pick fast enough.
yeah.
Well, it's typical Paso Robles. I think they
Yeah.
had over 30 days, consecutive days in 2017 that were over 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And even in
And
the
not that much crop, and so then the
Right.
vines were really vulnerable
Yes.
to rapid ripening of the fruit.
Okay. So let's move to our third red, which is the 17 East Bench. Like Paso, it's 100% Zinfandel, but this coming from Dry Creek Valley from an estate vineyard adjacent to Lytton Springs.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a nice comparison side by side of 200% Zins from two different appellations. And what are the differences we're going to see in the glass here, Eric?
Oh, so much. I mean, in totally different soils, totally different microclimates. You've got the old vines that play, giving the Paso Robles that extra depth and dimension. East Bench is younger vines, but now they're starting to mature. I mean, they're about 21 years old, or not quite, 19 to 20. So they're
planted in 2000.
teenagers.
Yeah, they're just getting into their
Teenagers
prime.
just starting to settle down and behave. And what I love about this site, and the soil is just amazing. It's that deep, rich red terra rosa, a lot of iron in the soil and the clay. So that has an effect on just the mineral expression, the texture of the wine. But also when David you planted 4 different historic clone or selections of Zinfandel.
Yeah.
So you've got all of that complexity at play, even though it's 100% Zin. Each of those selections will bring a unique flavor, where it starts to layer and create a really complex Zinfandel.
So we were just reviewing this earlier today. We started ingredient labeling with the 2011 vintage,
Yes.
and that release hit the market in 2013. So it's now been 6 years since we started ingredient labeling. And the reason we did that is that we wanted to be completely open with our consumers, and so they knew exactly what was in the bottle. There was no mystery. And that also to illustrate that we're a traditional winemaker, that we don't use a lot of processes or additives in our winemaking, and we wanted to use this as a tool to communicate that as well. My question is, why haven't more wineries followed us? I mean, 6 years later, I can still count on one hand the number of wineries that do ingredient labeling. Why? I mean, David, why do you think that others are not following suit?
Well, besides the fact that label space is at a premium, so if you add ingredients that you're taking away something that you want to maybe perhaps say to the consumer, besides, this wine goes good with chicken or something. The other thing I think is that it's a slippery slope, and if you're committed, if you're going to say yes, we're going to put ingredients on there, then you have to put everything that you do to that wine
In every vintage,
in every vintage,
vintage,
regardless of vintage conditions.
Yep.
Right?
So, and I think that's what that's one of the biggest deterrents.
That scares me.
Well, it's the
I think
complexity
so, yeah.
of the whole label process, the approval process, dealing with the TTB,
Yeah.
putting it all out there and having to then be, ready for audits.
Yeah.
I think it scares a lot of wineries that don't want to necessarily reveal everything that goes in,
Yeah.
but also just the headache of the whole label process.
Well, it's a big deal.
Absolutely.
Doing the
It is.
labels. I mean, Heidi Negan knows that very well.
Yeah.
And if you have to, if you have to set up, if you're set up so that you just have your front label stays the same every year except the vintage changes, and then you do a little bit on the back label, that's much easier, and to change that is very difficult.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, 6 years later, in some ways I'm disappointed more wineries haven't followed us, but in other ways it's a huge advantage for us continually in terms of it's a huge differentiator, and it allows our salespeople to go out and talk about the uniqueness of our winemaking, the uniqueness of our labels, just the openness of our philosophy, right? So it's great.
Really showing it.
Yeah.
And then you can really see, which ones are organic, which ones, are vegan friendly, which, really most of them are. I mean, it's rare that we use egg whites, but, you can see that. Anyone that's interested can just look at the back of the label and see it.
Sure. So a question about the structure of the yeast bench, a little bit bigger than in previous years. David, what's accounting for that versus previous vintages
So
on
it's
yeast bench?
the French, bless their hearts, have a saying that with red wine, red grapes especially, that it takes 12 to 15 or so years for a grapevine to actually mature its fruit in its site, so that you get a more complex wine, and they're that's very true. Seeing this, especially with Zinfandel, which is a very transparent grape, it shows where it's grown and how it's grown. It very much translates that into the wine, and that's what we've seen in the last few years. 2015 was a pretty complex and pretty grippy East Bench.
But because of no yield
Well,
there,
that's
right?
Drought.
I thought that
Drought
was an
and,
anomaly.
low yield.
Because of the drought. The 16, despite its beautiful forward fruit, still had some really nice grip on the finish, and the 17 is in that vein again. So I think this is 100% Zin on the bench in Dry Creek. This is what it can do.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
kind
think
of what
it's
I was
beautiful.
tasting with MWs last week in London, and they were noticing the progression of how this wine has just gotten more complex with time, and you have to attribute to the vines are getting their roots deeper, they're starting to settle down. And then the other question is like, well, why is it not blended? Why isn't it a fuel blend? And it's like, well, it's in a tannic terroir. I mean, you look at just this wine being 100% Zin and the structure it has. I mean, could you imagine what it would taste like if there was Petit Syrah and some of the darker blending grapes in there? It'd probably be really quite massive.
Yeah, and practical things can make a difference, and you can use them to your advantage too. This is a leased property. The owners, when we planted it in 2000, 2001, their one stipulation was they wanted it 100% Zin.
So they wouldn't allow us to plant it.
They were worried because if the lease deal that we made fell through, they didn't want a mixed black vineyard to try to sell in the market. So
even though that's what's desirable now, everyone wants
but
those type of
not in
vineyards.
2000.
Not in 2000. So rather than get stuck on that, and actually rather than make this an imitation or a variation of Lytton Springs, it's its own beast.
I think ultimately it's worked to our advantage. It's nice to have 100% Zin to contrast with.
Because you can then taste the beauty of that,
Yes.
the purity of that Zin in Dry Creek. I mean, it just screams Dry Creek in the nose. I mean.
Absolutely. But I mean, to contrast that, David, as we replant vineyards at Lytton Springs, for example, we no longer plant 100% Zinfandel blocks in our own property. We choose to plant field blends. Why is that?
Well, it makes a better wine.
There you go.
That's the short answer. And we're actually not even planting 100% Petit Syrah anymore. It seems like it adds complexity, and it seems like those wines, the wines coming from mixed vineyards, are more complex. You can add into that mix of other varieties, and it can be anywhere from 5% to 50% of the mix. You can add in varieties that give you something that you feel that primary variety might lack.
Yeah.
For instance, at Lytton, if the Zinfandel in some of our soils might lack a little acidity, you can add Baugher, which on its own, Momadon is just a big bag of acid and a little bit of sugar, and they're big clusters. Co-fermented with and the co-pigmentation that happens with Zinfandel or Petit Syrah is marvelous. It's pretty cool.
And we've really seen where historically, or if we planted a solid block of Zin, it might take 10 years before that made a Lytton Springs, consistently. But with these field blends, almost right out the gate, they're going straight into our top wines, right?
Which is where we saw at Geyserville when we did our first plot of a field blend. Immediately, that block was producing wine of the quality to go into the Geyserville.
So there's a question about you mentioned the Zin selections at East Bench, the 4 historic.
Oh, yes.
What are they and where do they come from?
Well, we have Heart's Desires, Geyserville.
Yes.
Wine Creek, which is kind of Dry Creek Valley.
Also known as the Hambrick clone.
Oh, the Hammer, which had been at the Norton Ranch, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we transplanted the Pichetti off Monte Bello, cool climate, and then Pronzolino, right?
Yes.
Mendocino.
Yeah.
Another cool climate.
Which is known in the industry
Yeah.
as Duprat.
Duprat, yeah, which
Just
is
to make
really
things more
nice.
confusing.
Hey, you know, it's all it's all smoke and mirror. No, I'm
Yeah.
just teasing. They seem to be different.
But they are different, and the cool thing is you can see, at least with the experiments where we have at Geyserville, all on a common piece of ground, same microclimate, everything's identical. Pick, ferment, the Mendocino, Duprat, Ponzolino, and the Pichetti are the 2 that are still acting like they're in a cool climate. So it's like their DNA, whatever was going on in their selection process, they are still reliably acidic and juicy and exotic as far as the wine.
Compared to
I'm
the other.
sure this is what's going on even at East Bench. Having that diversity of the different blocks being able to be fermented separately.
Yeah, people don't really talk a lot about that in Zinfandel, these different selections, right?
Yeah, well, ZAP, Zinfandel Advocates and
Yeah.
Producers, teamed up with UC Davis to select and preserve a bunch of different heritage Zinfandel clones. And the viticultural data doesn't show a big separation between them all. But when they're made into wine, especially these little controlled small lot fermentations where they can do very precise very precise fermentation, so everything is the same. They're showing differences. It's fascinating. We don't know why.
Yeah.
Maybe tiny little mutations or whatever.
In the DNA.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
So another question going back to the Paso and the water addition. At what point in time is the water actually added?
It's like right at within the first 2 days of crush.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Before
once,
fermentation really
once.
starts.
Also, it's kind of ideal because then it kind of helps create a little bit better condition for the yeast to get established and then be able to ferment better. The other thing, by doing a lot of open top fermentation and tub pump overs where we're aerating, you have to kind of take that into consideration when you're looking at the alcohol potential, because you're also blowing off a lot of the alcohol as you're circulating the juice. And I mean, you stand over the tank and it's just like, alcohol's blowing off. So that also helps to lower the alcohol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So why don't we move to the last Zin or Zin blend, the Geyserville, which here, like the other 2, was down about 10% versus the 16 vintage in terms of yields. But, a classic wine we've been making for more than 50 years. Yeah.
Vintage 52 now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Alluvial soil.
Very much so, yeah.
What is it? The calcium to magnesium ratio? What is
Calcium
that?
meg in the soil.
So those
minerals.
ratios are in favor of like calcium, which is important for the vine to absorb, and it's linked into color development in the skins, the acidity being maintained. It's
Feel all that.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those sites where on the ingredient line you might find some vintages where we add calcium carbonate.
Yeah.
And we'll do that early on in the fermentation to help precipitate out some of the excess acid. So it's an acidic vineyard, 2 miles to the east of Lytton. So
Very
here they
close.
are, like right next to each other, but Lytton is more like a typical Lytton spring, Zinfandel vineyard, where it sometimes will require a little addition of Tataric. Geyserville is the opposite. Yeah.
So on the heels of 200% Zins, now we're trying a wine that's a field blend.
Yes.
With high percentage
With
of Carignan.
some variation vintage to vintage
Sure.
to how much is Zen, and you can always say the second grape will be Carignan, because that's really what we have most of as the second grape in the vineyard in terms of acreage. And it's a wonderful blending grape. I mean, at times we've done it as even as single varietal bottling out of that vineyard. But it brings a roundness to the wine, a suppleness, the higher toned fruit. It really, with Zinfandel, just can really elevate the nose and give it so much intensity.
There's just so many more, there's more layers of flavor, there's more complexity in this wine, given all the soil type and then all the different varieties. I mean, there's like 23 different varieties planted at Geyserville, all of them adding a little bit of their own personality to the blend. So that's what's really always striking to me is the complexity of this wine. So I'll ask you the same question that I asked David earlier. If you were out selling Geyserville, talking to an account, what are the 2 or 3 key things that you would tell the account about this wine to get them interested in it?
Best Zinfandel made. It's pure.
You're a proud daddy, I can tell.
Yeah, no. What's amazing is that this is a vineyard that survived Prohibition, the Depression, the World Wars. I mean, there was every reason for this vineyard to be lost, ripped out, replanted to other farming products, but it survived, and there was a reason it was selected to stay in the ground because it was producing great quality then, supplying a lot of home winemakers during Prohibition. So there was just so much there to keep it in the ground and going. Yeah,
it was never pulled out and replanted to something else. Like you said, through the Depression, World War I, World War II, Prohibition, all of that, it's still there today.
There's a lot up against it staying in the ground. It survived all of that, and today we're so fortunate to own it, and we can keep it going, keep the vineyard alive and healthy, and it makes an amazing wine. Of all the wines we produce, I mean, it's the one that will really show, such a sensuous quality, a complexity. It's a very complete wine with, a good display of old vine vineyard, personality.
Absolutely. And David, having farmed this vineyard literally for 30 years now, what strikes you about farming this vineyard and what it produces?
Oh, well, it's one of the easiest vineyards to farm. So
it's flat.
It's flat. It's flat, but not only that, the soil is very deep, but it's not very rich. So the vines grow just enough. They're a little more vigorous than most of the vines at Lytton Springs, which means that their yields are a little bit more. That's much more consistent in yields. In fact, the 17 and the 15 vintages were the only 2 vintages in the last 15 or so years where it was actually below normal yields. And that's unique because Zin is notorious for going up and down, up and down. And having mixed plantings in there really helps. I'm amazed at the old patch and the old Carignan. These are beautiful vines planted in the early 1890s that in a good year will do over 3 tons an acre, and we'll have to thin to get to that. So it's crazy. I mean, and it's really, really cool. And there's some great varieties that in that mix. There are only a few vines here and there within the old patch, but it's really fun because working with Foundation Plant Services, which is a clean stock program for California, basically for the U.S. for wine grapes, we've been able to pull out 6 or 7 varieties now, including Zinfandel, Carignan, Syrah, Grenache, Pelersan, Alicante Boucher, Petit Boucher, and then some weird ones, Becklin Noir, which is from the Jura. It makes a light red wine. Saint Macaire, which makes a heavy, intense, or darkly colored, high acid wine, and that shows promise. We're going to plant a little bit of that at Monte Bello and see where it goes. And then the last one is Mortau, which is the official name for Cabernet Pfeffer. And just found this out last fall. And Cabernet Pfeffer is this obscure little grape that's grown in the Cienega Valley. There are a few producers that make it right now, and there are a couple vines at Lytton Springs and a couple vines at Geyserville. Both of one each from those vineyards are in the Foundation Plant Services, and we're going to this spring do a little safari in the Cienega Valley and grab a couple more of where it's historic home.
Is it a Bordeaux variety?
Yes, obscure Bordeaux variety. The two parents
It's an offshoot of
Mortal.
Cabernet?
No,
Something?
Cabernet
Franc or
no, it's older than
so
that.
It's even older.
Yeah,
Wow.
they're the
Maybe
two.
it's the parents of Cab Franc then.
It could be. I don't
or
think so. They haven't
one of
worked
the
out the lineage altogether yet. The two parents are two obscure grapes that start with M, of course, and they're just from that area, the Gironde. They're from but they haven't. I don't think they've ever been commercially produced for some reason. Kind of like Zinfandel, it took off here in California, but in a much more limited way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did they
weird,
even end in the vineyard? I mean, like when it was being planted, I mean, was it just all the cuttings and bundles were all put together and they just, was that the nursery?
So it depends on the variety. So St. Macaire and Becklin were actually very coveted back in the 1880s, 1890s. Some of the nursery advertisements in the different papers and stuff would have, for instance, Crabbe, who started amassed the Toquelan vineyard. He was also a nurseryman. He sold cuttings. His Cabernet, he called it Cabernets, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, he sold them for $5 per 100 sticks. But his Becklin and his St. Macaire he sold for $25 per 100 sticks.
Wow.
So they were coveted.
They were in demand then.
They're big clusters.
Oh.
Mortal or Cabernet Pfeffer, there's a character in that same time frame named Captain Pfeffer, Dr. Pfeffer, and he pushed it. He named it after himself and pushed it in the Cienega Valley, and it still stays there today. So
The name was generated here in North America.
yes, oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
go figure.
Okay. Oh, thanks, David. So, a couple more questions coming through.
Yeah.
The Geyserville, how will that speak to fans of Lytton, this particular vintage? I mean, to me, the fruit is a little darker.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think with just having those lower yields and then just the kind of heat we were having as we're going into harvest, it really drove up the darker fruit aspects. And and it's got a richness. It's got, more structure and weight.
Yeah.
So people who like the
I know.
Springs,
It is leaning
as a
that
more
direction.
Robust wine, the two are going to be pretty fun to taste side by
Side
side.
by side.
It's hard
yeah.
to tell the difference side by side.
It is, which is
Yeah.
not usually as hard, but this vintage, I think you're right, is going to be more
Yeah.
challenging. And then what does the Alicante bring to the Geyserville
More
blend?
color and more robust richness. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's only, 1 or 2% usually, but
Yeah,
it goes a
yeah.
long
I mean,
way.
we have in the old patch
Yeah.
just this one row where you walk through. It's the Alicante Alley. It's just lots of Alicante vines with its unusual leaf, shape. It folds over and it's really a dark green and it's easy to spot.
Easy to
And of
find
course,
field.
it's easy to sample. I mean, you just end up with dark juice all over your hand.
It's inky.
Yeah, it's
for
quite
sure.
inky.
And then what about the age? Here's another question about ageability of this particular vintage of Geyserville.
Oh, it's going to age
Yeah.
so well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like a structure of a Monte Bello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, have you done the analytics on this in terms of
We
the
did,
structure and what does it
I mean,
look
it's
like?
not as
I know.
tannic as Monte Bello, but it's still, for a Zinfandel, it's structured.
It is.
But it's also got really high quality tannins, the ones that are polymerized, and it's why you can drink it and enjoy it. The tannins are velvety and plush.
Very coated.
But it's going to age really well, especially with the acidity too.
Yeah, it just depends on how old you like to drink your wine.
Yeah.
Right?
And I like to drink Geyserville when it's 20 to 30 years
Oh, my
old.
goodness.
Like, when we sat down and tasted and did those little pairings. I mean, the 87, my gosh, today is just gorgeous.
We want everybody to drink their Geyserville.
Yeah.
You don't need to hold them for 20 years.
No.
So let's move to the sixth wine, the 16 Estate Cabernet. In terms of the harvest, this was a big harvest at Monte Bello. We have almost double the amount of Estate Cabernet than we did off the 15. So we got
Well,
wine.
We went from low yields in 15. I mean, there was not
Yeah.
much fruit. And then suddenly we're back to kind of normal.
Yeah.
Plus some more acreage now producing as we've been doing some restoration, replants. We're starting to see the benefits of some of those yields to give us more fruit to work with and select. We still did a pretty good selection between Monte Bello and the estate. the wine today, I mean, we really have kind of refined our approach to making the estate versus Monte Bello. We've identified within the vineyard here at Monte Bello, the 45 plots, which ones tend to make Monte Bello, which ones tend to produce a softer, more fruit-forward style wine for the estate. In the winery, then we're handling those fermenters, in a more unique way of really guiding their process along so that the estate lots can be softer. And we're not trying to over-extract. So we'll do less remontage, we'll press early, and be more careful about the tannin structure in the wine.
And you wrote a great article for the newsletter that'll be
it kind of explains it all. I mean, just the history of that wine, and
So look for that, everybody. It'll be hitting your mailboxes pretty shortly here, but it's a nice article. And you really, what was interesting to me when you talked about, rather than making a second wine with Estate Cabernet, you talked about making two first wines.
Yeah, two first wines.
Talk a little bit about how the philosophy's changed on that.
Well, I mean, we had always tried to make everything Monte Bello, and then we would, try to extract in the winery and build these, sizable tannins into the wine because, for Monte Bello, we're looking at long-term bottle age. But what we would then do, during the assemblage, end up declassifying some of these lots that were then too tannic to make a nice, elegant second wine. So we really shifted the philosophy, and that was really driven by Paul. I mean, really looking at what we were doing and beginning to make this separation, which we started in 2002.
Right.
And really immediately saw that it was so much better and creating these two different wines from the beginning rather than, first wine and then automatically declassified second wine. It's just treating everything as two first wines from the same vineyard. But this vineyard is very steep. There's so many blocks. There's so many areas where you've got a difference in the soil. You've got water availabilities, some areas that then really in how the plant is growing there, the physiology is really producing more fruit characteristics in the berries and less tannin and color to make a more elegant wine.
Yeah.
So then strategically going through and picking each area, we can then ferment carefully in the winery.
How many blocks of Estate Cabernet are there, and how many Monte Bello blocks are there on the mount?
25 that I would categorize as Monte Bello.
Yeah.
And then at least another 20 or so that are estate.
Yeah.
There's some that are kind of right at the margin and can move back and forth based on the growing conditions of the year.
Sure.
But, more or less those areas are reliably going to make either Monte Bello or estate.
I mean, what I've really noticed, over my time at Ridge, when I first got here, what was the Santa Cruz Mountains Red at the time was a bit hard, right? It was tannic, it was hard. Today, the Estate Cabernet, even on release right now, it's lush, it's open,
so much more polished,
and just by changing the winemaking on the Estate Cabernet, not trying to make it into Monte Bello, now we're making these beautiful wines that are in big demand because they're just so luscious on release. Yeah, it's really fantastic.
It's just been the perfect direction to go.
It's been really good.
Yeah.
So
I mean, because I like to drink this wine young, but to get it there, you have to be really gentle with the extraction in the fermenter. I mean, we're looking at 5 to 7 days of fermentation and no more. I mean, pressing early and even hold unpressed wine out so that it isn't going to contribute too much tannin to the wine.
Gentle handling, and then
long barrel aging
and less new oak.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's not going to be as much new oak as Monte Bello, which is 100%. Here, we'll back it down a bit. We do want some new oak to really bring in some nice kind of rounding out of the tannins. The sweetness of the barrel is really good for that. But we're really trying to make this wine really supple and drinkable.
Okay.
And it expresses Monte Bello terroir, but not as laser focused as the Monte Bello does.
Yeah, but I mean, still, what a great value, at this price to be able to express Monte Bello terroir and be able to access that in your glass and to be able to drink it early. Yeah. I mean, that's such a winner, this wine. Yeah. So, great. Well, congratulations on that wine, Eric. It's terrific.
Thank you.
Well, I'm conscious of time, and we're at about the 54-minute mark, so I want to thank David and I want to thank Eric for their time today. And
thank you.
I want to thank the audience for joining us. today. Hopefully everything went well on your side. Thank you for all your great questions through the chat bar, chat function. That really enjoyed those. That was really awesome. We will see you again for our fall virtual tasting on September 13th, Friday the 13th. Something to look forward to. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. Have a great Friday. We'll see you soon.